Hello YouTube, Peter with you once again. And in my last video, I gave my thoughts about talking about religion in 2024 on YouTube. I used to do a lot back in the day, now not so much. This video, I want to make something similar but about politics. Because 2024 is an election year, and being an American citizen and resident of the United States, I have some stake in that, to say the least. On the other hand, I realized that using my channel to try and reach persuadable voters is probably not the best way to go about doing that. Currently, I'm more interested in donations, volunteering, grassroots campaign work. That's probably a more effective way of trying to reach persuadable voters in the political election. So if I'm not using my channel to try and reach persuadable voters, but I'm still interested in politics and the surrounding topics as a subject, after all, I did minor in political science in college, what's my angle? I'm not a political commentator, a news commentator, constantly making videos about the news of the day, the ups and downs of the election. I just don't have time for that, amongst other things. I just don't find it that interesting either, and that space is overcrowded as it is. So where does that leave me? One thing I learned in my years of doing YouTube atheism was that you start out thinking that you're going to use reasoned arguments and have a semi-Socratic dialogue with someone where you're going to persuade them of your point of view. They're going to state their reasons, you're going to state your reasons, you're going to debate the merits of those reasons, and then the most reasonable position's going to win. And you quickly become disabused of that when you actually deal with something like religion. Religion is one of those areas of life, most areas of life it would include, but religion more so than most, where there is a certain degree of irrationality and other motives and other incentives that are not even necessarily conscious to the person. So this idea that you're going to have some sort of Socratic argument that you're going to win and then you're going to change their mind, well, if that's what you think, then you should actually go and read Plato, because when Socrates tried to do that, they said, "Here is a nice tall glass of hemlock, drink up." Beyond that, though, I find it interesting, this sort of mentality of the Trump supporters, because I occasionally do get pushback in my comment section, and there is a part of me that would like to have some sort of reasoned, rational discussion with a Trump supporter to say, okay, let me hear your reasons for actually supporting the guy. Let me give you what I see as the negatives, and let's reason this out. Let's debate this out. But by and large, I think that it kind of falls into a couple different buckets. The ones that really believe that he is the chosen one who is destined to fix all America's problems, and he really is going to make America great again. The sort of true believers, the cult members. Then there are people who are a bit more cynical about it. They're on the periphery, but they see him as the vehicle for what amounts to Trump as a kind of Chairman Mao figure in their right-wing version of a cultural revolution. They want to purge America of woke. They want to denounce this as woke and that as woke, and get people fired as for being woke, and claw back the country culturally. And they want electoral politics to fix what they see as wrong with culture, which personally I think is a complete misuse of politics. Meanwhile, how the government actually operates has little to do with their would-be cultural revolution, and they're being taken for a ride by the Republican Party. Yet again, putting aside the cultural revolution thing, I think that is all a distraction. Speaking to the people who might be in this camp, right? You think, what about the liberal SJW, blah, 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 all the people who 2012 Tumblr is living rent-free in your head? That's not what our political system is for. It's not to fix those problems. And when the politicians actually get elected and get into office, they're not doing what you think they're doing. The Republican Party exists to, once it's obtained power, by getting rubes like you to vote for them for culture war issues, or Jesus, or guns, or abortion, whatever reason that they've tricked you into voting for them, once they're in power, they drop to their knees and they suck off their corporate lords and masters. That's the reality of the Republican Party. And if you haven't figured that out yet, I don't know what to tell you. But other than the cultists and the cynical people who believe that Trump is going to be their Chairman Mao for their right-wing cultural revolution in the United States. There's another group I like to call the hanging on by one reason people. You've probably seen in cartoons or sometimes slapstick comedy movies where somebody falls off a cliff, but there's one tree branch that they're hanging on to, that one tree branch off the edge of the cliff. And these are people who, if you really sat them down, they're aware of most of Trump's negatives. They're not quite as in denial of the ones who just use the thought-terminating cliche of fake news or something like that. They don't necessarily buy into the persecution complex, but for whatever reason, they've attached one thing that they think Trump is going to solve that problem, and that is the one and only reason that they're clinging on to. For example, there are some people who seem to believe that Trump is going to win the next Nobel Peace Prize by solving all the world's conflicts. They really believe Russia's nuclear bluffing. I will do it. I will push big red button. And they're like, oh no, only Trump can save us from that. Now, one might think that the people who have one reason to support Trump might be the most persuadable. But the reason that I invoke the image of a cartoon character hanging off the edge of a cliff by a single tree branch is they're probably, in some ways, the least persuadable. Because they're basically going to otherwise drop into the abyss of realizing all the negatives of Trump. It is like they're clinging on to that for dear life. Those people can be the most stubborn. But returning to the whole culture war issue, there's one subject that on one hand, of course I have things to say about it. On the other hand, I'm so done with it on another level. So a lot of the anti-woke right essentially has become a dark mirror of what they claimed to hate 10, 12 years ago. Take feminist frequency, for example. Back in the day, if you were to show a normie feminist frequency videos, they'd probably say, wow, she seems like a scold in a wet blanket, and does she really enjoy any of this? If you have to criticize media rather than enjoy it, like what kind of enjoyment are you getting out of entertainment if you're constantly picking apart like this? And yet, all these years on, there's entire channels basically dedicated to the grift of here's how the woke SJW agenda is ruining video games and movies. They changed the pronouns in Magic cards from he or she to they. Oh my god, the woke agenda. They have female custodies in Warhammer 40k. Oh my god, the woke agenda. There's a fucking girl in my Star Wars. Oh my god, the woke agenda. Kathleen Kennedy. Oh my god, what's the phrase kids use nowadays? Touch grass? And genuinely, there are some people, even judging from some of the comments I've gotten in previous videos, with engaging in whataboutism, what about the crazy cult-like leftists? The answer to that is, all right, the sort of leftists that you're worried about are on the periphery of power. Whereas when I talk about Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation is very much close to the center of power. They actually have people who staff Republican administrations. They actually influence Republican policy. That person you're in an argument with on Twitter, they have no actual power beyond pissing you off on Twitter. There's a whole lot that could be said about the entire right-wing culture war. But, man, get a life. So much of it amounts to, like, get a life. Stop being a right-wing version of what you claim to hate. I don't know, like, touch grass, get a hobby, get off the internet, whatever it takes. You do not want to be the person who is in their car in a parking garage of a movie theater going like, I walked out of Star Wars The Force Awakens because feminism has ruined Star Wars. They put a woman in my Star Wars movie. Boo-hoo-hoo. Like, don't be that person, for fuck's sake. Oh, and if you're going to indignantly complain about changes to pop culture things you claim to love, at least get things like the names right, like Adeptus Custodes. Jesus fucking Christ. That honestly got a chuckle out of me, seeing Mr. Right-Wing everything is woke nowadays grifter dude couldn't even pronounce Adeptus Custodes right. But it's really terrible ruining Warhammer 40k if the Adeptus Custodes have female custodies. Oh no. And that is just the complaining grifter side of it. It amazes me how many of these people have gone to some really weird places, like dredging up Victorian Edwardian ideas about masculinity. masculinity. They have some sort of, like no fat movements because you have to preserve your precious bodily fluids. Like those are 100-plus-year-old ideas that they're still kicking around as if they're anything other than pseudoscience. Like, for fuck's sake. So many of these people that talk about Western civilization, they couldn't pass an actual history test on the subject with a gun to their head, but somehow they're an expert on Western civilization. Oh, I'm sure they did the part about the Roman Empire. They'd get that correct. When you're dredging up advice from the Victorian or Edwardian period in response to the crisis of masculinity, then yeah, I think calling you weird is completely justified. But on that subject, there's a left-wing response to the whole manosphere right-wing grift that basically says that what we need is left-wing versions of Andrew Tate, and we need to go about giving these young men dating advice and life advice, and that's how we're going to win them back to our side. And I'm not necessarily against giving young men dating advice. I did a long stream about this called Fake Dating Advice. Why I think a lot of this right-wing dating advice for young men works is because it gives insecure young men the gentlest possible critique. Maybe you should work out more, dress better, that sort of thing, while at the same time giving them actionable, gamified advice. You take these steps, you hit the gym, you get this diet, you wear these clothes, you approach women with these pickup lines. And it gives the young man hearing this advice a sense of agency. And the ideological part of it, well, it is troublesome in its own way, is, I think, less important than the fact that you're giving them a sense of agency through actionable advice. The real problem is that they're essentially dangling out a carrot in front of them, saying, if you get laid, if you get a girlfriend, if you get your trad wife, that these things are going to somehow make you fulfilled and happy, and all the loneliness and bitterness and resentment that you feel will disappear once you have these things. And you know what? Life doesn't usually work out that way. And to get men to stop being so lonely, isolated, and miserable, the right-wing path is basically going to isolate them more by turning them against women, immigrants, people from other countries, people of other races, LGBTQ plus people, by separating themselves from all of those groups. That's most of humanity. And they become more isolated. The only friends that they can seem to make are people already within their right-wing echo chambers. Believe me, I've dealt with a few people that were in that space and they try to step out and be normal, and they couldn't let go of the terrible habits that made them insufferable that they learned in, 8chan land or whatever fever swamps of the right wing they came out of. They become more unlikable people when they ingest that ideology. They become more isolated and more separated from other people. And the only friends that they can have are from people already in that circle. But it's much harder to say, maybe you need to work on yourself in some more fundamental ways than going to the gym or dressing better. I mean, it's not all bad. Try, I don't know, mushrooms and a walk in the forest. That might help you a lot more than a lot of this crap. To me, this idea that left-wing dating advice is a counter to the right-wing manosphere shit, I think it's missing some of the big picture things. It's focusing on oh, we can dangle that carrot in front of them too. Instead of saying more, I hate to say spiritual, it almost seems hypocritical of somebody like me to say a more spiritual perspective. Because when you look at somebody like Andrew Tate, he's in a lot of ways telling young men that their whole life is got to be defined by pursuing material possessions, by impressing other people, by getting the hot babes as a one-up on other men. And you know what? Here's reality. Life consists of a lot of pain and suffering, and one day you are going to die. You do not have to live according to any of these expectations that other people are putting on you. But this right-wing manosphere, griftosphere, all of this, it's basically imagine an RPG, right? And they're trying to tell you how you should play that open world RPG. They're saying to you, all right, here's the thing. You're going to want to put all your stats into strength and constitution because you want to be the tank. I mean, yeah, intelligence is pretty much a dump stat. I mean, what are you going to be, a wizard? Okay, so now that you've chosen a fighter or maybe paladin, if you want to be, an officer of the law, a lawfully good paladin, okay, once you've built yourself the tank stat, then here's how you're going to play the game. You're going to go and you're going to grind. And And then you're going to get a farm, and you're going to grind on that farm. And then one day, when you grind hard enough on your farm, you're going to go to the local tavern, and you're going to press Sally the tavern wench, and then you're going to marry Sally the tavern wench, and then she's going to have a bunch of kids for you, and then those kids are going to help you grind on your farm. And then, of course, you're going to obey all the local laws, and whatever the local religion is, that's what you're going to follow, because that's tradition, dude. And then you grind and you grind and you grind, and then one day when you're an old man, you die. Oh, what's that? You want dragons in your Dungeons and Dragons game? Well, no. You need to live this narrow life script, mostly involving grinding and trying to impress other people. That's the way you play life, the open world RPG. Like, that is the ultimate mentality of what a lot of this is saying. All this trad wife, this, all of that kind of stuff. It's basically saying you have all these possibilities in front of you in your life. You have all the people you could be, all the experiences you could have. Now, here is a rigidly prescriptive idea of what you're supposed to do with your life. Fuck that. Fuck that. Go find dragons instead. Be a wizard. Do what you want. Because, you know what? As I said, you're going to suffer and one day die. And I honestly think that a lot of men's unhappiness and loneliness and depression nowadays stems from the fact that society has these rigid prescriptions of what they're supposed to be and they're supposed to do as a man. And things like economics means that those things are incredibly hard to obtain. So when they don't achieve the things that they're told they're supposed to achieve, it makes them miserable. And the cultural expectations of masculinity very often make men unlikable. Here's the brutally honest truth. There's probably at least 20% of men who they have this standoffish, stick up their ass, chip on their shoulder, anything will trigger their aggro type attitude, where it's like, why would you want to be friends with that person? Like, they're not even approachable. So that person is miserable and isolated? Gee, you don't say. It probably seems easier to say, look, we can give you the left-wing path to the same carrots dangled in front of you, and harder to say, look, this is more of a personal journey to figure out yourself and what you want out of life and how to make yourself not miserable and get out of the sense of loneliness, open yourself up to the rest of the world so that you don't feel so alone and isolated. Learn to understand other people without trying to get something out of them. That's a much more wishy-washy, woo-woo, indirect. It's not like first you hit the gym, then you buy the better clothes, then you try out these pickup lines so they work. It's like simple, actionable, gamified advice to get to the carrot dangled in front of you. I mean, that's more digestible. But I really think that this narrow-mindedness very often leads to a kind of self-inflicted misery. And I've definitely had moments where, aside from the fact that being a man my entire life, people have been trying to question and police my masculinity, only for some people to suddenly turn around and tell me that I was born with the one and only criteria they consider necessary to be a man. Well, that's a shock. But aside from that, all these expectations of a man's supposed to be this, a man's supposed to be that, at a certain point, you just have to let that shit go. I'm not saying that you have to not be masculine at all. That's not the point. The point is about choosing for yourself what makes you happy, regardless of whether or not it fits into some sort of box. For example, a while ago, I like to paint miniatures, and I got some comment where somebody was basically trying to do you're not a real men don't play with toys like that, and the person was essentially just a killjoy. A man is supposed to have this rigid life of providing for their family. They got to get on that farmstead and grind. There's no wizards in this open world RPG. You got to be a farmsteader grinding it out. You got to support your wife and kids. You got to do this, and this to be a real man. Well, fuck all that. If I want to paint miniatures, that's my business. If that's what makes me happy, I don't give a fuck if you think that's not what a real man does. Tough shit. It's my life, not yours. That's the secret to getting over a lot of this is, number one, it's your life, not theirs. Number two, life is all too short, full of suffering, and eventually you die. None of their bullshit matters. in the long run. And I know that this video is supposed to be about politics, and I'm talking about a lot of cultural issues. I'm suddenly talking about masculinity and comparing right-wing views of what a man's supposed to be to an open-world RPG and character building within an open-world RPG and all this other stuff. But look, this is what passes for politics in 21st century America. And in a lot of ways, that's a shame, because that's not actually what government does most of the time. Trump is not going to bring about a cultural right-wing revolution, no matter how many podcast interviews J.D. Vance does saying that they should take votes from cat ladies and give them to trad families with 10 kids instead. And the sad truth is that is the degraded state of our politics. What do you want me to do? Sit here and talk about the economic impacts of Donald Trump's proposed tariffs? Like, really? Really? Okay. No, you don't. No, you don't. You want to talk about how once Donald Trump is reelected, you're finally going to end wokeism or some shit like that. Anyway, there's much more I could say about all of this, but that's enough incoherent ranting for now. I will probably pick up some of these topics in the future, probably repeat myself, but so it goes. Have a good whatever time it is.